welcome to Access. I'm Nicole.
I'm Ken.
And today we're doing Romans.
Romans. I have nothing funny for Romans.
It's the big book of Romans.
It is. Romans is a great book. The first one we tackled by Paul.
Yep.
Nicole's going to tell us all about the history.
Yeah, so Romans was written in the late 50s. And what's happened in Rome is in the 40s, the Emperor Claudius expelled all the Jews.
They were naughty in class. They've been expelled.
But in 54, after Claudius' death and Nero's ascension, Nero allowed all the Jews to come back in. So what's happened is that for about 10-15 years, the Christians in Rome have kind of developed their own ways in their own community, and then all of a sudden these Jews who are also part of the community, or think of themselves as part of the community, come back in, and you're blending again. And you know, there's always tension. We learned about this in the Minor Prophets. Ezra, Nehemiah. It's hard to blend a family, you know. And so
I find the higher settings work better. It just chops through.
Until they're all a milkshake. And you can't tell the berries from the ice cream.
Sorry.
Okay, so that is the situation that Paul is speaking to. Paul actually never goes to Rome, but he is writing in anticipation of going there and then moving on to Spain. It is also kind of a fundraising letter.
Many of his are.
Yeah, like, he is a missionary,
Yeah.
and as much as missionaries like to check in and share the good news about what God is doing, sometimes they need a little cash, a little green.
Show us some love.
Really little silver in this community. But that's not a bad thing, and I think we don't like it when people ask for money. But for them, it's
reality.
It's reality,
yeah.
And also emphasizing this idea of community across boundaries and across borders, which is really nice.
Aww,
it is.
That's so nice.
And I love Romans. You get tons of theology is in Romans.
It's not like a normal letter.
It's not.
It's kind of a big
letter. It is thick. Because you get the idea with the other letters that, like, there's a problem in the community and Paul is writing to them to fix things as, like, the hammer that comes down.
The hammer, that's right.
But in Romans, you don't get the idea that they have solicited Paul for anything, and he's just writing to them. And he doesn't know if he's going to actually make it, so he's given them everything he's got. And there's lots of women in this book, and it's great. That's the history. Go for the
awesome,
themes.
You bet. For themes, before I do the total themes, I just want to say a word about Paul and letters. You know, all we know from Paul are these letters that he writes, and you all know this. You know, when you've got different family members, different kids, you say different things to different children, to different family members, to your mom, to your dad. You couch things in different ways. You might even have different, messages because you know who they are.
Yeah.
And you might say something, one year, and you would totally say something different another year. Paul never is trying to make kind of a cohesive, universal, systematic theology that is universal for all time and space. Paul is writing to one community at a time, and he says one thing over here, and he'll often say something very different over here. A lot of folks have a hard time with Paul. They're frustrated by little bits and pieces that he says here and there that they don't like or they get lifted out. I would encourage all of us as we read Paul to realize, he's a pastor who's trying to deal with different issues as they come, and he's dynamic. So especially like with women, for instance, he'll say at some points that women should be silent, but then like at the end of Romans here, he's calling Junia an apostle, and he's recommending Phoebe to do work that's the kind of work that he does, clearly not being silent. And you have to hold all of this, in tension, where it's a person who's contradictory like any human being is. So always remember the format, the letter. Paul would probably have written very differently had he known he was going to be addressing billions of people for thousands of years.
If he knew he was going in the canon of literature, like he didn't know.
No.
And like any person, you grow and you change over time. And I think history, we want people to fit in a nice, neat, tidy package.
And be consistent. We think if we trip somebody up, if they say one thing here and another there, we've got them. Well, no, what you found is a human being.
Right.
Who's sometimes double-minded. And
I took a constitutional law class this last quarter, which was great. Thanks, Dr. Garrison. And it was great because we would look at these Supreme Court justices who would have careers that were like 30, 40 years long and look at how their opinions on certain issues like slavery, contract law, change over years.
Yeah.
And that we need to allow historical figures to be people and not like a cheat sheet summary chart of what they believe. And I like Paul.
It's so true with Paul. Yeah. I'll say one more thing too about the letters. Lots of arguments about are some letters authentically Paul, are some letters not. The easy way to address this first is we don't know. Nobody really knows. I would encourage you to read all of these letters as if they're from Paul. The arguments in the main are that the ideas shift and that Paul doesn't sound like Paul sometimes. Well, you know what?
Sometimes Nicole doesn't sound like Nicole.
And there are some legitimate, sometimes there are linguistic differences. So it is possible that some letters might have been drafted later by a community. But we're not sure. I would have you not worry about that right now, especially since all you need to do is to get acquainted with all these letters first, and then to talk about authorship, very complicated stuff for your next level. How about that?
Yeah.
Good way to...
It's for like your 10th level.
Well, the only thing I'd say differently is the letter of Hebrews is historically attributed to Paul. Nobody buys that. Everybody acknowledges Hebrews as its own creature, and probably not written by Paul at all. So that's kind of the only thing we want you to hear. On to the letter itself, the themes. The big problem Paul has, and it is a big one, it is that it starts. The Christian movement starts out a Jewish movement, and then by the time Paul is kind of mature in his ministry in the late 50s, like Nicole says, things are near the end for him. He's got an enormous problem, and that's that the Jews aren't buying it. The Christian message is really only flourishing among the Gentile population, and there's this huge kind of crisis of faith for everybody, saying, the plan was for the Jewish community to get it first, and then for it to spread out. But it's not working like that. And Paul spends almost all of the first part of the letter, trying to articulate, why this might be, why the Jews are resistant to the message, whereas the Gentiles come in. So that's big. The second part of it is community. Is the community itself